Hey everybody, Chief here. Today I'm going to work on headless, wireless, Wi-Fi included booting of Ubuntu Server. So since my last video, I've done a lot of research on Cloud Init. I continue to do a lot of research on Cloud Init, and I got a pretty good feel for it. And I thought I had everything perfect, and then I just kept getting in this issue where it wouldn't actually read my user data from the boot partition. And it turns out, so I found a project on GitLab, and there was one key thing that I wasn't doing, and that was in the metadata, was setting the data source mode to local. So there's a project on GitLab that I'd like to show everybody real quick, just because this guy really helped quite a bit, and this is what we're going to use, at least to start with, to do Cloud Init. So I was able to use this guy's script, and the boot was incredibly fast on this. I mean, it was like 30 seconds. I'm so sure of it that it's going to work, A, because I've tested it, but B, that I'm going to do all three of my RPi4s that I want to put in my cluster. I'm going to boot them at once. So if you see over here, I'm going to boot all three of these things at the same time, and I'm going to set host names and IPs, static IPs for all three. So now the way that this works right now is Bjorn Samuelson has his project, and I will update the description to include this link. But basically, you'll go through, and he's got this settings private.dummy.sh, and all it does is set up an SSID and password. Now, I actually don't use this. I leave it like this, and then I'll modify the output a little bit. And then he's got this settings public.sh, where it's going to read your git config, your user name. So you want to make sure that you have git installed and that you've at least run git config global user.name. And it'll pull your ID, and it'll auto-generate this user data file. Now, here's what it does. It actually puts it inside this system boot folder. So when you create your bootable image for Ubuntu, you'll have two partitions. You'll have one that is exFAT, and it'll contain the configuration. The boot, basically it'll be the boot directory, and that boot directory is then mounted onto the boot file system on the second partition once boot starts up. And that is controlled by basically what you're booting from within this command line.txt. Now there's a couple different ways to do this. For the Raspberry Pi, it's always going to be MMC BLK0P2, at least for the near future. You could also do root equals label in all caps equals writable, and that will make sure that it's picking the partition that has a label of writable, and that should be the ext4 partition. There's some other stuff you can put in here, but the big one is this. So we added ds equals no cloud, and then s, when you look at the Cloud Init, I'm going to make sure that I'm on the right. I am not. I've been doing this a lot lately. Okay, sorry. Starting over, Bjorn's project, bringing you up to speed. This is basically it. So you'll run a config.sh. You'll customize the settings public to add your any customizations you want for host name, time zone, Wi-Fi region. A lot of this you may not need in the end, but he did this with Ubuntu 18.4. So this, you'll notice this is over a year old, and it turns out a lot of this still works. So I modified it slightly after the fact, just for some updates and there's some things where Cloud Init does. And if we go to Cloud Init, actually, let me go back. So it's going to run the config.sh, which will generate a Cloud Init folder inside that what's called system boot partition, and it'll generate a user-data file, which if you've looked at your system boot partition after freshly burning an Ubuntu image, you'll notice that there's already a user data, and that was getting ignored. Now, I don't know if it's because it wasn't Cloud Init wasn't unpacking those MIME types correctly and discovering that file correctly or not, or if it was timing or something like that. There's one other key thing that Bjorn does in this that I'm not entirely sure we'll need to do in the long run, but for now I'm going to leave it, and that is he disables the systemd online wait service on boot, and that is basically saying disable the service that waits for a network connection before continuing with other setup. And what that'll allow us to do is just manually run netplan with a set configuration that we know that will work. Okay, so long story short, there was one further thing I think I wanted to mention. I think it was in user data formats. Anyway, what I've done is actually disabled. Oh, yeah. Okay, so if we go back in here and we look at the settings public, it'll have host name, time zone, Wi-Fi, and it has this SSH ID RSA pub. And for some reason, I haven't actually, taken a close look at it yet to figure out why, but even though I have this exact file and it exists, maybe there's a space in here? No. It does not load this in to this environment variable. And so after generating the resulting user data file, I go back and I add in my public key. Now, one thing that I'm going to try in the future, Cloud Init has support for if you pass in a username of a GitHub user, it'll pull public keys. And that could be a way where you can automatically allow boot. The other thing that this does is in the settings private dummy, so you'll basically change these values and save it as settings private.sh, and then it gets called from that config sh. It'll define SSID and password. So the only bit that I'm this password right here on line 1 is actually the password for the default user, the user you're going to log in with. And I'm actually disabling that entirely. So this will be an SSH only login. Now, I'm so confident of this. I have 3 of these set up at once, and I've got my train of thought that just went out that door. So, okay. All I'm going to do is run this config.sh. Now, I've already run this. So I'd show you the output, but there's a Wi-Fi password in it. Actually, let me go change it real quick. Let me change this, and I'll show you the file that it creates. Okay. So here's the file that it creates. If we go, you'll just come in here and you run config.sh, and everything will work. I'm not going to run it again because it'll regenerate it. And so I'm going to open this up. So the resulting directory, you'll have the system boot, which we're going to copy into the system boot directory from the USB that we have mounted that has our image that we're going to boot from. And then it writes out this cloud.init folder, and that cloud.init folder just looks like this. And that setup.sh is an optional file that you can run at the end. I'm about to walk you through that, and what I'll do is describe what I'm going to be doing in my own project to create this Electron-based like UI that you can go through. And a lot of what he has in this optional final sh file, I took it out. I actually don't run the setup.sh because you can do it now with cloud.init. And that's what I'll be hacking on a little bit later at the end of the stream, maybe or in another stream. So let's take a look at the system boot cloud.init. And first we'll look at metadata, and then we'll look at the user data. Okay, so the metadata file just has this DS mode local. Now if you look at the metadata file on your mounted USB, it'll say instance ID, and I think it says something like cloud instance or something like that. So by setting this DS mode local, I think it's what's triggering it to look at that user data at the right time so that it actually gets used. I've gone back and looked in the cloud.init logs for some of my previous boots, and if you go back into run/cloud-init and you look at the logs, it'll tell you what user data it parsed out. And the weird thing is it shows that it parsed out that user data, but even when I add in like additional users and groups and stuff like that, it does not create those things. And I think it's just because cloud.init hangs at the network, which is one of the things that Bjorn disables in his thing. And no, I think we can actually use the network. It's there's a trick I think we can use later on to change that, but for now I'm going to leave that systemd wait in here. So what will happen when it boots, it'll show that the systemd wait online service will fail, and then it'll just continue, and then it'll run that net plan, and boom, you're connected. It's like 30 seconds later. The only thing I'm changing that I haven't actually tested is the password lock true, so that there's no plain text password. But I actually never logged in with my SSH password or my user password. I just did SSH immediately. So now let's look at this user data. So what you'll be able to do is set a host name and a locale and a time zone. So that comes from public sh. Now lines 11 and 12 I added. You'll want these for GPIO access on the Raspberry Pi 4, well, and 3. And then it pulls these values from, remember this geckos is from Git. It pulls your Git config and looks at your username, and then name, it just pulls for the user that's running the config script that you ran. I also modified this from his output a little bit. So the groups that you see here are the groups that are in the default. They're basically in the Ubuntu image. These are the groups that are given to the Ubuntu user. And then I also added the GPIO group. Now later on, I'm going to mess with some dynamic configuration where you can add in like Docker and other packages and stuff, and it'll make changes to a couple different blocks in this YAML file. So then, like I said, the config script, for some reason, even though it's supposed to write out one of your SSH public keys, it didn't. So I came in and added this. So all I did was open up that my SSH public key in my SSH folder and pasted this in here. And this is my public key, so it's not private. You can get it off of GitHub apparently. And then here's the important part. So with the normal cloud boot process, there is a network-config file in the system boot directory of the default image that you burn from upstream canonical, the Ubuntu image. And what he does is puts this inside the netplan directory, and then later on at the bottom I'll show you where he actually deletes any like the templated cloud init ones. So it's actually not using the network config that you would find in system boot. And this is where I think, later on we can get around it by not turning that service off, is using the netplan renderer in the system config. But we'll check that later. The other thing he does is he sets up SSH right off the bat, and this makes it so that you're immediately able to SSH in. So with Ubuntu, you no longer do the create the empty SSH file, which basically the way the Raspberry Pi boot works, I think the Pi firmware booter will try to enable SSH that way, but it won't do some of the other setup that you need. And by doing it this way, you're assured that you're setting it up at the right time with the right keys and everything like that. Okay, so boot command, so there's 5 stages of cloud init, and the boot command runs in, I think, the second stage. So the first stage is it launches and it looks at the command line.txt and the basically the kernel commands that are given for startup. The second stage, before the third stage is where like network configuration happens, and then the fourth stage is where it looks for user data and vendor data, and then the fifth stage is the final stage where you can run additional scripts. So run command happens in the fifth stage, but boot command happens really early in the cloud init process. So what he's doing, what we're going to do is disable the systemd, the network wait online service, so that the boot will continue without a network. And then this is where he lets the rest of the boot continue. So it's going to create netplan. It's going to move the system boot directory into the boot. It's going to mount it onto the boot folder on your root partition, or what will become your root partition, which is writable. It's that label that says writable, and that's slash all those other things, etc and user and bin and lib and everything. And it'll create the users in the group. It'll basically run everything else in this file. And then it'll come down here to run command. So at this point, the network has not been set up. First, what'll happen is he'll remove etc netplan, this cloud init. So if you've ever looked at this part, because you've been playing around with netplan with Ubuntu 19 or 18 and up, there will be like I think it's 50-cloud init or 99-cloud init or something, and it has that initial where it tries to set up Ethernet. So you've seen all the videos on YouTube where they're like, we're going to install Ubuntu on Raspberry Pi, and we're just not going to do Wi-Fi because it's too hard. This is really where that comes in, is this file has only Ethernet defined. There's no Wi-Fi. If you try to do the Wi-Fi boot through the Raspberry Pi firmware boot manager, it does the WPA online or the WPA supplicant, and you never get there because Cloud Init wants you to do Ethernet. There's no other setup, and the systemd network wait online basically will hang forever. Your Cloud Init will just not work. Okay, so after he removes those, we assign the right permissions to this etc netplan file, which we added using the right files cloud.init module. We added that in line 40. And so what happens now is we just run netplan apply. So netplan will enable your Wi-Fi interface, which is hard-coded on Raspberry Pi. It's going to be WLAN 0. So it's going to enable WLAN 0, and then it's going to set up the networking that you configured above. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to assign a specific IP address here. We'll say 200. And I set DHCP4 to false and added DHCP6 false and added addresses in gateway 4, addresses and name servers. So you can get this out of the README of my file where it describes this. In Bjorn's default output, this will be, it'll say DHCP4 true, which basically means it's just going to get a, DHCP IP address from your router. So it'll just get whatever's available in the IP pools that your router will assign. Now, I don't want to do this because I'm doing 3 at once and I have multiple Raspberry Pis. So what you can do is use ARP monitoring and watch as the Pis come up. Unfortunately, multiple Pis will match and it gets a little weird there. So using these IPs, I can actually have consistent stuff and I can preset my SSH configs locally. So I added a little bit of Wi-Fi configuration there. And then this is where he sets up the password authentication module configuration so that you get faster SSH login. And by faster, he means it's available in the boot process sooner. And so he backs up the old config, moves it in there. So you'll have the old config if you ever need to go back. This multi-architecture support is good if you're doing things like Docker or you have packages that only run on 32-bit or they're only 32-bit and you're on an ARM64. You'll still be able to install those using apt. You can also, there's also a module for that now in cloud.init, so we may be able to take that out. Final thing it does is just it installs IW, which is the successor for wireless tools, and sets that region domain. Now there was a final line here where it ran the setup.sh script after that finished. And I'll show you what that script is real quick, just so you can kind of get a guess. But I clipped that out because I'm going to do that with cloud.init user data after we get that working in a project. So here's system boot, cloud.init, setup.sh. Okay, so he basically just installs or uninstalls cloud.init and removes everything except for basically the cloud.init logs, and then runs an apt-get update, and he has some packages in here, you know, that he likes and suggests. Now basically I take this out because, well, who uses Emacs? Nobody. You shouldn't. Use what you want to use, but I don't use Emacs. I'm a Vim guy. This Docker stuff is old. Even in 2018, I think it was Docker. It wasn't Docker.io in 2018. I think it was Docker CE still. Now it's Docker-engine. And none of this other stuff I needed. USB mount. So this was a problem with Bionic for UDEV, and there's some other things that I'll do with write files for UDEV where I'm not gonna need this either. So basically when it came down to it, I really didn't need any of this, and I wanted to leave cloud.init in there anyways, just so I could do like cloud.init analyze and stuff like that after the fact, just to kind of verify everything worked the way that I wanted it to. Now this is weird. Huh. don't know if this is still streaming or what, but I just got a notification that my phone at least thinks that it's offline. So maybe my phone disconnected, but the Pi's still streaming. Or that's just a dead image, which would be funny. We're almost to the point where we use it. So, okay. Here's where I'm at. So at this point, I've got my disk mounted. You can see in system boot and in writable. So we're not gonna need to modify anything in writable. And remember, system, if you look at writable, there's this boot folder. So after the first stage of the boot process, everything here will get mounted onto here as the boot menu. So what we're gonna do is just copy everything from this top system boot into the system boot here. So right now notice there's no cloud init folder. So what we'll do is cp-r system boot into media chief system boot. Oh, I need to change that password back, so give me 1 second here. Okay. So here we go. Okay, so copied that in. If we look now, we've got a cloud init folder, and all that data is in there, and it should have overwritten the command line .txt. So that's what we will confirm. So let's real quick confirm command line.txt. Okay, yep. So that's in there. All right, so I'm gonna unmount this card, take the other two, copy those over, and then we'll go over to the Raspberry Pi stack I got over there, and we'll boot all these up. So unmount. What is keeping it busy? That should do it. I will be changing the IP addresses. Of each one of these. And the host names. So I'm just going to do that manually in the user-generated user data instead of rerunning the config script. So you get to watch me for a minute just because I don't want to change the dummy passwords back. Okay, and now I'm going to run that cp command again. And unmount this one, so I finished writing that. Okay, oh yeah, I need to make sure that that's mounted. Change that file. Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to set, so I have physically assigned IPs for each one of these. And I'll go in and change this. Okay, so when those come up, they should be ready. I know what IPs they're on. I've got one of them displaying. Okay, so that did crash. Let me bring that back up real quick. Thinks it's on time warp. Well, how about that? Hopefully the hardest part of this stream, the only thing that goes wrong, is this stupid GoPro app. It's like every time I load it up, it just goes straight to time warp, like the camera is time warping. And it's not. I really want to get this on video because it's something else just how fast it is. Here we go. And there we go. Okay, so I'm going to take all three of these over and plug each one in. And I don't know which is which. I kind of forget. But I think the top will be Workshop 0, then Workshop 1, then Workshop 2. I'm going to turn the power on for all three at once. And the display is plugged into the bottom one. Actually, I'll do it flip, so I'll put the 0 in the bottom, and we'll just watch it boot. But all three should come online about the same time. I got my good luck charm ready to go. Okay, so here we go. This took about 30 seconds last time I did it. So remember I said it'll go through, it'll hit that system D network D online wait, and it'll say failed, and then it'll just keep going. Now this will pause for a second. So this is about where Cloud Init is really starting to do its thing. You can't see it in the background. You'll always get this boot up screen, and then after like 20 seconds, you'll see Cloud Init output take over for it. And here we go. And that's it. So that's the successful boot up that we want. And now if I come back to my terminal here, I should be able to ping or not. Make sure we got what I thought we got. Try this. Make sure my SSH config is right again. Okay, let's try one of the other hosts. See if one of them is ready. Well, there's one, and we're in on that one, so let's exit here and we'll try Workshop 2. That's interesting. No route to hosts. So we got one that came up and two that didn't. That's interesting. Maybe I had typos or something. Or, well, I don't know. Maybe I missed something. Let's figure out which one is which here. Actually, let me just see. Okay, so 200 and 202 are there, but they're incomplete. Interesting. Well, I guess 1 out of 3 ain't bad, right? Next thing what I'll do is just reboot all 3. And see if they come back online successfully. So first I'm going to plug this in to each one and just see if they have the same display. You know, I'm starting to wonder. I put that video group in there, and I'm betting that the Workshop 2 was the only one where that's the one that I had the monitor plugged into. So I wonder if we take the video group out, if they'll all boot. Am I plugged into a different one this time? Nope, same one. So let's just check. We still got 2 incompletes. The Workshop 2 is back up already though. Or is it Workshop 1? Huh. So we got that. That one worked. And the others are not. Maybe I should try it with 1 by 1. Let's do that. So I'm going to SSH into Workshop 1, and one of the things that you can do with Cloud Init is you can actually clear the run, and so it'll act like it's the initial boot all over again. So I'll even do that with this one, and that's just because I don't know which card is which. And I'll be curious to see if Cloud Init runs, and I don't know if it was because of that video group or not. forget the actual command. I know it's cloud init clean, but there's something else that you gotta, I forget the args for it. Here we go. I guess it's just clean. Okay, so I'm gonna pull all those offline and just do them one by one at a time. Okay, so this one ran, and then it looks like it had a problem applying net plan. Something failed somewhere along the way. Maybe I had a bad config file or something in there. Just checking something. Well, that's interesting. Oh, Workshop 3, duh. Okay, so Workshop 1, something changed. Interesting. Let's see if this one shuts down if I issue a shutdown command. It does. It definitely did. So that was Workshop 1. Okay. So that was Workshop 1. So let's move to the next one down in the list. In the stack. So this one's workshop 0, and I wonder... Just trying to ping it here from my terminal and getting a timeout. Well, this is interesting. And so I can manually wipe it. So I bring it over, remount it, and then there's basically like an initial, it's like, I think it's called initial boot or something like that, a file that you can erase. And then you remove run cloud init logs. And maybe we'll do that. Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that and just see what happens. What login is it prompting me for? The other option here is that I got like identical host names or something wrong on this. So I'm going to mount this up. And we've got, gonna remove var log cloud init. So now we're actually editing this writable. Let's delete these. So we'll remove that. Actually, we'll need to sudo remove the rf the chief writable. Let's cd there first. I think that should do it. Okay, I'm gonna check the user data real quick just to make sure I didn't screw something up. I did. I did screw something up. Okay. So this is what's going on. So we've got this lock password in here twice, and I forgot that this is something I changed. So we actually want to remove this lock password. So remember, with the lock password false in there, you'd actually have to specify either a hash password or a plain text password. And so that's why that failed user setup just basically crashed. So I'm going to fix that for both the other two and see if that does it. Just going to go double check my settings for, make sure that got changed back. That should be it. Okay. What I don't know is if I missed a file. I'm gonna try to double check real quick. Cloud.init. I'm going to watch this one as it goes just to make sure that I cleared the right file, or that I didn't miss one. Because I think I remember seeing something about there being like a initial, like a boot initial or something like that. Okay, rerun data source. Rerun data source detection in the initial setup. So you can actually rerun it. And okay, I think I got it. Okay, so when it has booted, it sets an instance ID. So in varlib cloud data, or in varlib cloud instance, and then there's a boot finished file in there. So I'm going to double check just to make sure that I got that. Cloud instances, no cloud. I don't know if that is correct. varlib cloud data directory. Okay, so these are dynamically generated. Instance ID, no cloud. No errors. DS mode local. Finished stage, no. So I think this is broken. We're just gonna delete that. It says that I think I can just remove this entirely. Hopefully I didn't just break something for good. Okay, so eject this. Let's try it again. So this should be workshop 0. I should have had that on. Anyway, we're going to go over here, and that quit again. Okay, stream full of errors and a comedy of errors. So the good thing is I got it working right on camera once, and I identified what the error was. I'm not going to worry about resetting up this stream from the GoPro. I'm going to plug it in, and we'll just watch through ARP here to see if this comes back up. I should be able to tell on the monitor over here. So something went wrong with it still. I think I just need to reburn that image because I deleted something that it needed. It didn't go through the initial boot. It went through like it was just a regular reboot. So I'm going to have to reburn those disks and try that. I won't bore the stream with that. So the last thing that I want to go through is I have this project, and just want to make sure we're showing the right screen here. Okay. And all these things should be possible through Cloud Init through the user data format. So want to be able to add a UI where you can kind of just go in, kind of like a Raspberry Pi imager, only add in additional stuff. So the ability for you to automatically create the sources and add the GPG keyring for things like Docker, and then Docker groups, and all that can happen on initial boot. GPIO configuration options, which will include UDEV rules for GPIO that are compatible with Raspberry Pi. SSH key, creating unique SSH keys and storing them in your local on the computer that you're using to write from. And then even something like emitting a GPIO event on a particular pin on that final, when that final thing runs. So you could do something like flash an LED, or what have you, send a signal or something. You can also, there's a power state module for Cloud Init which will allow you to auto reboot afterwards, and you won't necessarily need it if everything works correctly, but it can be nice if you're just basically wanting to get back to like a regular boot. And then there's some other things I'm working on around creating a local data source server, so you could actually contain. You still have to do with Raspberry Pi 4. You still have to do micro SD cards, at least for the moment. USB booting isn't quite possible right now. You can do it, but you still have to boot from an SD card and then reconfigure a whole bunch of stuff. So you still have to have the SD card there. And the last thing I want to try is with Cloud Init, if we can get that network stuff to work. In the final stage, or in the SSH configuration stage, this is built in with a module in Cloud Init, where you can get public keys from GitHub, so you won't even have to worry about local public keys. So I want to set this all up in an Electron type project where you have a nice UI where you can just toggle things off and on, and hit modify. So basically what you'll have is you'll load in a USB that has the Ubuntu in it, or alternatively this could download and burn to a USB to create a bootable USB, and then it'll make these changes, plug it in, and it'll actually watch and monitor for that device to come online. So that's it. If you have suggestions on things that you'd like to see with this automatic configuration, drop by this project. I've decided to call it Boot CNC, which stands for Boot Command and Control. Couldn't really think of a good word for it, name for it, because it's not just exclusive to the Pi 4. I tested this earlier, went really well on a Pi 3 as well. And so I changed it from Ubuntu-RPi4 to just Boot CNC. So eventually, be able to have different flavors and stuff like that. Anyway, that's all for now, and we'll see you next time.